Okay, so what is metabolic health and how do we measure it in the research realm? Metabolic health is essentially your body's ability to process and utilize nutrients. You can think of an example like the carbohydrates we get when we eat grains or fruits or some starchy vegetables. Utilizing those carbohydrates. Okay. I'm not off the road or anything. It was like a big pothole and I was just kind of on the side of it. Don't get too worried. Metabolic health is basically your body's ability to process and utilize nutrients. Now, we have several ways that we measure it. I'll give you 4 examples. The most crude measure is called HOMA-IR, or the Homeostatic Model Assessment for Insulin Resistance. Basically, it's a measure in the fasted state of your glucose and insulin levels, and we use that as a metric largely for your liver or hepatic insulin sensitivity. Now, the next measure is a dynamic measure. It's the oral glucose tolerance test. This is when you would go to a hospital or clinic setting in the fasted state. They give you a carbohydrate drink. It's not the best tasting drink in the world. It's not sugar. It's just straight glucose, which for those of you that haven't tried it, it's not the best tasting carbohydrate in the world. But it's fine, So you drink this glucose beverage and we track how your body changes its glucose response over time. So anytime you ingest carbohydrates, we expect your blood sugar levels to go up, right? That is a normal response. That is not unhealthy. These days, I'm going to take a quick sidebar and talk about continuous glucose monitors right now. The advent of large-scale CGM or continuous glucose monitor usage has created some misperceptions or fear around increases in blood sugar levels. Your blood sugar levels going up after a carbohydrate meal is completely normal and expected. That is healthy metabolism. So when we do these oral glucose tolerance tests, we give your body exogenous carbohydrates from the glucose drink, and we expect your blood sugar levels to go up. What we look at is the pattern at which they both go up and back down. And we want to see your numbers go back down at the 2 and 3 hour time point. And people whose numbers stay elevated at those times tend to have risk for metabolic disease like type 2 diabetes. And so this is how we can assess that. So extremely healthy people can have a peak in their blood sugar levels around 60 minutes or so, and we'll be back to baseline or even below baseline by that 2 hour time point. Individuals that stay elevated, and to put some numbers into context for you, your fasted glucose levels in most situations are about 90 milligrams per deciliter. That's our standard healthy blood glucose level. So at the 2 hour time point, if your levels are still elevated at like 50% above that, right, around the 135, 140 milligram per deciliter range, that is considered at risk for type 2 diabetes. And then if you're above 199 or at that 200 or higher range, that is a diagnostic measure we use for type 2 diabetes. So, that is another way we assess metabolic health. Now, my favorite way to assess metabolic health, which is really the gold standard, and it's the only way we have to assess your peripheral tissue insulin sensitivity, that would be like primarily your skeletal muscle. So your skeletal muscle is actually responsible for 80 or more % of your insulin-stimulated glucose disposal. What does that mean? That means when you have an insulin stimulus, which happens when you consume outside carbohydrates, your insulin levels go up. When you have that insulin stimulation to your tissues, your muscles are responsible for the majority of that blood sugar level in your body going from your blood. That sugar goes into your muscle. So that reduction or disposal of blood sugar is primarily due to skeletal muscle. So what we do with the hyperinsulinemic-euglycemic clamp, this is an absolutely amazing procedure. It's an inpatient hospital procedure. So you have to come into the hospital or research setting. We lay you down on a hospital bed. It takes about 6 or more hours, depending on the procedure itself. But we lay you down and we don't feed you anything. We bring you in the fasted state and we directly infuse sugar and insulin into the body. So we know exactly your blood sugar and your insulin dose that you're getting. So what it's called is it's the hyperinsulinemic. Hyper meaning high, insulinemic meaning the insulin in your blood. So it's a high insulin, euglycemic, meaning we keep your blood sugar levels at 90 milligrams per deciliter. how do we do that? Well, what we do is we infuse a constant infusion of insulin into the body. And as soon as we put insulin in the body, your blood sugar levels are going to drop, especially because we're not giving you outside food or anything to eat. So what we do is we actually adjust. It's called a variable rate glucose infusion that goes into the body, and we adjust that to make sure that the amount of glucose we're putting in your body is the same amount that your body is taking from your blood and pulling into your muscle tissue. And so this is the way we can actually measure the amount of sugar that your muscles are disposing of. And we calculate that as a rate, right? We do it milligrams of glucose per kilogram body weight per minute is our metric that we use. But this basically tells us, okay, if we give you this amount of insulin, how much glucose are you going to dispose of? Individuals that dispose of more and more glucose are more and more insulin sensitive. Because remember, like I said, everyone gets the same constant infusion of insulin. It's adjusted for body size, but their levels of insulin in their body are essentially equal. So everyone's insulin levels are all elevated, similar to the levels you would have after a meal. So we elevate insulin to that level, and we see how much glucose you uptake over time. And the more and more you uptake, the more and more we infuse. And we use that amount that we infuse as a really good metric of your glucose disposal rate, or the insulin sensitivity of your peripheral tissues, primarily skeletal muscle. Now, it gets even fancier if you had tracers in there. Tracers are ways that we can actually label the blood sugar that we're infusing into the body and essentially see where it's going. And this means we can actually get rates of your hepatic or liver glucose, your insulin sensitivity in your liver as well. Because what we do is we actually measure your reduction in hepatic glucose production. So for those of you that don't know, this is going to get deep into metabolism. This might need to be a long form. April, maybe you can pull up a schematic here of the hyperinsulinemic-euglycemic clamp and a little bit about where carbohydrates are coming from our infusions that we're putting in, from both insulin and glucose, and also the hepatic glucose production. So your liver in the fasted state is constantly making glucose. That's how when you are not eating anything, your blood sugar levels stay relatively consistent at about 90 milligrams per deciliter, right? Your body's always using glucose from your blood for something. Oh man, it's time for me to go to D&D. All right, I got to run to Dungeons and Dragons. I am a couple minutes late, and my group's going to be missing me. But I'm going to come back and we'll finish this video after D&D.
Okay, D&D is done, so I'm coming back just to chat about our fourth measure of metabolic health, which is metabolic flexibility. This is where we're looking at the body's ability to change the nutrient that it's utilizing primarily for energy production. So we look at this as the oxidation of either carbohydrates or fats and the ability to switch between those. An example, in the fasted state, you should be utilizing primarily lipids as fuel because there's no outside carbohydrate coming in. Your blood glucose levels are remaining steady and your body's using fats for energy. And then when you eat, especially a carbohydrate meal, your body should be able to shift over very quickly and shift from lipid or fat utilization to carbohydrate utilization very quickly. One of the ways we assess this is through what's called indirect calorimetry, or we measure the production of CO2 in your breath and your consumption of oxygen from the air you're breathing. And we can use that to calculate estimates of the fuel that you're burning. So for reference, there's some products out on the market right now that say they can measure your lipid or carbohydrate use by you blowing into a device. I promise you 100% they cannot do that. You have to have both oxygen and CO2 sensors in your device to do it. And I'll tell you one thing, all right, I'm not going to name any device. Devices I've seen on the market only use one of those two, and they use it as a surrogate for using the other one. What does that mean? They're rolling the dice. That is an inaccurate way to do it. Okay, back to metabolic flexibility. Your ability to shift fuel sources. We do this during the clamp because we measure your fuel utilization in the fasted state before we infuse the insulin and carbohydrates into your body. And then we measure it in the insulin stimulated state while we're infusing all those carbohydrates. And your ability to change your fuel utilization from lipids to carbohydrates is a good indicator of your metabolic flexibility, or that ability to shift between fuels. There have been some more modern instances where people are looking more at utilizing different types of meals and the change in fuel utilization, for example, with high fat meals or high carbohydrate meals or otherwise. So we don't only do it from the clamp anymore. There's also pretty good reason to do it after an overnight fast, the ability to shift from where you're at before you go to bed to where you're at when you wake up in the morning, and look at that ability to shift towards fat utilization instead of the switch between fats to carbohydrates. But that's just a bunch of cool science stuff that's out there. The classic way to do it is the difference between the basal and insulin stimulated state of that hyperinsulinemic euglycemic clamp. Okay, so to sum up, we talked about what is metabolic health. It's your body's ability to process and utilize the energy that you give it, the nutrients from fats and carbohydrates. And we talked about 4 research ways to assess metabolic health. The static HOMA-IR, primarily a measure of hepatic insulin resistance. We have the oral glucose tolerance test, which is a more dynamic measure where you're looking at blood sugar changes after you have a glucose or sugar drink. And then the gold standard, which is the hyperinsulinemic-euglycemic clamp, where we infuse both sugar and insulin directly into the body and get an understanding of how much carbohydrates your body is utilizing when you have insulin available, and then that metabolic flexibility as well, which we use as a way to determine whether you're using carbs or fats as fuel, and the ability to shift between them. Okay, so that is your What is Metabolic Health 101 primer and the research methods we use to assess it.